All right, welcome back to another episode of whatever this is on my channel. I just wanted to get back to recording. Uh, I've been saying more. I don't want to get into it. I'll do a whole other video about like my issues and things like that with getting back to this channel on a regular basis. But today I just want to just start with something that seems just like that has been on my mind recently, and then with all the stuff going on in hip hop right now, I figured I might as well talk about this and let this be the reason why I'm coming back. There's tons of other things I want to talk about, but we'll start with this. So I was just watching a video by Reap My Soul, their channel. Really fantastic person. Really like their stuff, but something. This specific video is talking about how much success is needed to be in the GOAT conversation, and I love thinking about these things. I've talked about it on my personal podcast, audio journal, whatever, and I just made a comment on their channel, but I was like, what am I doing? I need to let's make a video about it. I've been meaning to make videos about like the comments I make, because I be in the comments. I like having discussions with people. I like thinking about these things. So high time I made videos about what I'm commenting about. So yeah. Anyways, this video is talking about what makes people, what's part of the GOAT conversation, right? I'm not gonna rehash the video. Go watch the video. All right. If you're listening to this, just go watch the video. What I want to talk specifically about is something they brought up in that video in regards to the fact that we have sort of these inconsistent ideas of what makes a GOAT, right? Greatest of all time in terms of hip hop. Sure, it's probably there in other music, but especially in hip hop, that's a big thing, right? And what came to mind for me is like the reason why this topic is so interesting to me is because I find it very, I don't know, almost strange that we don't have a better way of communicating this, right? Seeing with how big it is in the culture, I think we really should be much better with actually communicating what we mean when we say, "Oh, he's a GOAT, he's a GOAT, they're the GOAT, they're the GOAT, we the GOAT," whatever, right? And so here's what I want to put forth. Here's my theory, if you want to call it my contribution to this conversation, is that I think that we need to clearly define, well, a couple things. I think we need to clearly say if hip hop is a sport, right? Shout out to Screwface, saying, "Oh, hip hop is a sport" all the time, But of course, many people have been saying hip hop is a sport for a long time. So if that is the case, I think it needs to be treated as such, right? Because in any sport, right, you have a clear idea of several things, and I'll cover this shortly. You have a clear idea of what the sport actually is, right? The rules entailed of the sport. But the other side of the conversation is if it's not a sport and people will say, "Oh, it's just an art form," right? In that case, "Oh, everything's subjective," and blah blah blah. But the reason why I think both of those are like too far of a binary, or rather, I don't even want to say it like that. What I'm really trying to say here is that I think there needs to be a conversation of treating it as a sport with art, right? Essentially melding these two and having a more productive conversation of like what makes hip hop a sport and what makes it an art, and how can we combine these things, right? If we are treating it as a sport, I don't think that excludes it being an art form, right? Because you can have, even in the sportiest of sports, I'm not a sports person, but even in the sportiest of sports, you can say, "Oh, that has a level of art to it," right? That has a level of an art form, with the way they move around the court, or the way they run, or the way that played out, whatever, right? You can say there's an art form to it as well, right? So even in a sport, you can say there's art to it. Likewise, I think even in art, you can say there's sportsmanship to it. There's athleticism to it in a way, right? In terms of all these other things. So all that being said, with however fluid you want to have these definitions of art and sport, I think we still need to be clear on three things. Three things, right? Number one is how you win the game, right? How do you actually win this battle, right? And this is why has been really on my mind lately, because we've had all of this, back and forth between Joey and Rayvon, and Reason, and all these people just popping out, and it's great. It makes a lot of hip hop very exciting, right now. And but the problem I see with a lot of these conversations is how people are trying to figure out who did the best, right? Who's up right now. A lot of it seems to be like almost vibes thing of like, oh, Joey's up because this because how he feels in the bars and stuff like that. But then other people say, no, he didn't really have no bars like that, right? He didn't really go in like that. And other people say, no, Ray Vaughn is up because he got the bops, he got you going to it, he disrespectful, this, that, and the other, and blah, 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 back and forth, back and forth. Now, you can say, oh, that's what makes it fun, is that we can have the discussion. But I would actually argue no, because half the time these discussions are not fun, right? Half the time these discussions are frustrating. It's because it feels like you're just talking to like stands essentially. Like you start hearing that, oh, you're just a stand, blah 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 blah, right? And so it's not a productive conversation. It's not a discussion. It's just an argument, right? And I don't think that's fun. I think it can be fun to argue about this stuff, or rather, I should say, to discuss about this stuff, right? But it's not necessarily fun to argue in a way that is clearly there's no cohesive conversation going on, right? There's no understanding that I could be wrong and you could be wrong and we'll meet in the middle, or even that you'll come to my side or I'll come to your side. Like there's none of that, right? It's usually just I'm right, you're wrong, right? Or it's dismissive in the way of like, oh, I'm right and because it's my opinion and I don't care about anybody else's opinion, right? We all have opinions. It's all subjective. But that's not interesting either, right? I think that discredits the art form and the sport, right? What makes art and sports so entertaining and so enjoyable is that we can enjoy it together, is right. We can have different understandings of the sport. We can have appreciation for the sport, for the art or whatever, and discuss about it, right? That's what makes these things so interesting. If your team is going crazy, whatever, then we have a discussion about what makes your team so interesting, what makes them so crazy. And then similar for an art form, if you see a piece of art and you're like, oh, I like this about it, this is what they're trying to say and everything like that, then somebody else is like, no, I see this other thing, right? And this it's blah, 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 blah. And then you have a discussion about it, right? That's what makes art interesting. That's what makes sports interesting. It no longer becomes fun when it's just, oh, what I say goes, right? Or it's just my opinion and I don't want to hear anybody else's, right? So all that being said, I think going back to my 3 points here, I think we need to have these clear understanding of if we're doing a battle rap, for instance, right? We need to be clear about this. If we're saying this person is the GOAT, right? We need to be clear about that. So once again, number one is how do you win the game, right? How do you win the game of battle rap, right? And specifically, even outside of the actual field of battle rap, because that's another thing I'll mention shortly, is that battle rap has its own some elements of this already, but out in the sphere of what's going on with Joey and Rayvon and all these people, how do you declare the winner, right? Is it numbers? Is it the best techniques? Is it how fast they replied? How do you actually say who won the game, right? Who won the battle between here? Because in my opinion, if it's just vibes, if it's just whatever the people say in a vague way, then it never becomes a very interesting conversation. It always is going to devolve into stands and he said, she said, and all this bullcrap, right? So that's number one. We need to clearly define how you win. Number two is we need to clearly define how you're playing the game, right? What are the rules of the game, right? If you're playing a professional sport, for instance, basketball, they'll say they have a literal rule book, right? These things are written down, how you play the game, right? But even without that, if you're playing street ball, right? If you're playing on the street, you quickly say, oh, I'm playing 21, right? That quickly says what the how you win the game, get 21 points, and it quickly says what the rules are, right? Shoot the ball, right? There's the some people might say, oh, no dunking is good, or this, that, and the other. Some people you might say, oh, we're doing half court, right, or full court. And again, this is me as a person who does not play sports very often, right? I played sports a little bit as a kid, of course, as many of us do on the street, but like even I understand that as a person who doesn't play sports very much. I can clearly understand, oh, we're playing 21, this is the rules, right? Versus if we're doing this, like, once again, with this battle, how do you say how you're playing the game? Like, is it did Ray Vaughn go too far when he mentioned Joey's fiance? Did did Daylight go too far when he mentioned when he was alluding to Steez and everything like that? People say, "Oh, it's not too far. Oh, it's too far." This is why we need to clearly say what the rules of the game are, right? Because in so doing, then you can have better sportsmanship. Then you don't have to worry about this ridiculous conversation of, oh, they're going too far, they're gonna start shooting, right? We don't want the Pac and Biggie, we don't want the street coming out. Like, come on, man. Like, obviously, yeah, this is why it's so frustrating, because you want to be like, oh, obviously it's not going to devolve into that, right? This is people, they're just making poems on the internet, right? But the problem is, because we did not clearly define the game, because we didn't say what the rules are, that you can still have that conversation out there, right? And you can still have that worry out there that it might devolve into that, because we can't say for sure that it won't, because even the people who's doing this, right, maybe their feelings might get hurt, because you got to remember, all these are very, very how would I say that, they have big egos, right? I don't want to say some of them might be arrogant, some of them might be narcissistic, I don't know, but they definitely have big egos, right? And so you always have to be careful around that, because you don't know how well how humble they are, like how they're seeing that, are they seeing this as an actual sport, right? Or even in sports, people cheat, people get in their feelings and stuff like that. So even within the space where you have the rules, people are willing to cross the line. But when you do have rules, people are less likely to cross that line, because at least the line is set, right? At least you know what the line is. So once again, I think you need to be able to clearly say how you're playing the game and how to win the game. And finally, number 3 is what's not allowed in the game, right? Similar to the last one, it's not just the rules of how you play, it's also saying clearly this is a violation, right? This is a foul. This is whatever, right? If you do this, you're out. We're not even having a battle anymore, right? I think, once again, that's super important to actually say what happens, or to actually keep people from not crossing that line, from not going too far, right? And furthermore, I think it helps to offer a sense of accountability and consequences, right? Because in a game, for instance, if you say, oh, you hit a foul, technically you can do it, right? Like, nobody's actually stopping you, but there's consequences, right? If you do this thing, oh, you pass the ball, or the other person, it's their turn now, right? So even within that, like, that's what games are so freaking clever, man. And as an anarchist, I love that stuff too. Oh, I don't want to say anarchist. There's a whole other thing with that too, but I really value anarchism in everyday things. And to me, sports and art and stuff like that is great examples of that, because when these rules are made, right, it's not necessarily set from the top down, right? Maybe you can say that in the professional league, but I'm talking like everyday sports. You go play ball on the street, you make up the rules, and everybody agrees consensually on what those rules are and what the consequences are, right? If you foul out, people agree, oh no, you gotta pass it, right? Everybody is communally doing this together, and I think that's what we can do here too, right? If you do cross the line, whatever that means, right, then it's clear what happens next. So technically you can do it, right? So if it's part of your strategy, you can still do it, right? The whole point of this is not to limit people's art or limit the sportsmanship, right? It's to give clear constraints and clear understanding of what this art and this sport actually is. And in so doing, we can have a better enjoyment of it, right? We can have a better appreciation for it. But yeah, we name what's not allowed. And by saying not allowed, it's not some top down, oh, you're going to jail if you don't. No, it's an understanding of, oh, you did, that was a little dirty. That was a dirty play. And because of that, 5 yards back, right? Whatever, right? Whatever the thing is. So once you clearly say that, then people in these rap battles or whatever can understand, okay, this is part of my strategy. Yeah, I'm going to take it over the line, and so I'm prepared to take that penalty, and I'm still going to win, right? Or whatever. Or they might say, you know what, I don't want to take that far. That's a little bit of cop out, right? I feel like that's cheating. So I'm going to do this other route that's more creative, right? And in so doing, you can have these people think more creatively as they're going through, and you can have the audience be like, "Oh, I see what they did there because they didn't want to do the go over the line, so they went here instead, and blah 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 blah." So you have a better discussion, right? Now you don't have to worry about this dumb argument of, "Oh, it's too far, they're taking it to the street, oh blah 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 blah." Right? Nobody wants to talk about that. We want to talk about what they actually did. We want to talk about why they chose to do this. We want to talk about, the wordplay and the technique and the strategy, all these other things that makes this art form and this sport so interesting. So yeah, I think we need to have those three things. Once again, how you win the game, how you're playing the game, and what's not allowed in the game. And I'll say, the consequences of if you do that penalty. But yeah, that's pretty much it. They are keeping it short. There's some other things I said in this comment. Do I want to talk about this stuff? Oh yeah. So yeah, I'm gonna bring this up real quick too, and that I said in this comment is that I do think, to actually answer the question for that Read My Soul put up in his video. I do think you can have a productive conversation of what makes the GOAT, because once again, it has to have some clear restraints or some clear metrics, right? Measurable metrics. And the things that I put for my personal thing of what makes a GOAT, and I think, again, I'm not saying this as just, oh, this is what makes a GOAT for me. I'm saying that this is the metrics that I think other people should use to determine what the GOAT is, right? And people can discuss, right? Do you agree? Do you disagree? Let's make up these metrics. Let's make up these things, right? So anyways, these are the measurable metrics I put forth. I said impact, right? I think one of the biggest things you have to determine what makes a GOAT is impact. And the reason why I think that's measurable is beyond just sales, because I think I said in my comment, not just sales, but I said cultural importance, right? And that may seem like just that is just qualitative, but it's also quantitative, right? Because you can say things like, after they put out this project, how many people were copying their style, right? How many people were how many quotables do they have from the line, right? How many other people were sampling, their work, all right? Stuff like that is cultural impact. How did this change how people delivered things, or how people made rhymes, how people did that? And that's the impact, right? Did this change how people even, the types of conversations people had? Yes, that does get more into the qualitative aspects of it, which I do think is still important. But in terms of the measurable impact, there are a number of things you can measure there beyond just sales, because we all know that sales is just not enough, right? You can't just say sales, because he made a great point in his video. He said, McDonald's makes the most sells the most burgers, but no one says that McDonald's has the best burgers, right? Your local spot down the street probably has better burgers than McDonald's, and that's a great point, right? Like, in terms of GOAT, that's why I don't want to just say sales. In terms of GOAT, I do think impact matters, right? But it's not just the sales. The second thing I said is longevity, right? Is how long are people listening to this afterwards? And here's where you can get into the conversation of, did they make a classic, right? A classic is, like, to me, is something that holds up, years down the line, that people are still listening to years down the line. And I think this can work because you don't want to necessarily bias too much against people that's still alive, right? Because there is some great artists that unfortunately passed away. And so the longevity aspect can also be posthumous, right? It's just about plays, right? It's just about, like, are people still listening to this music, right? It doesn't necessarily say, are they still making music? Because I do think that could be important. Because for me personally, I think about, are these people still making music to this day, right? This is why Tech Nine is one of my favorite artists of all time, one of my GOATs even, because he's still making music to this day, and it's still different, it's still evolving, but that's a whole other conversation. Anyways, but yeah, longevity I think is super important, and we can take that in different ways, like I said before, but I do think is a very important aspect. Third is technical ability, right? Of course, the wordplay, the storytelling, the flows, all that stuff. We need to actually measure that. I think that is something that can be measurable. You can roll out the lyrics, How many word plays did they have in here? You know, how many metaphors, similes, analogies, alliterations, multisyllabic rhymes. How you can literally number all this stuff, right? And some people would say, "Oh, that's too technical. That's too blah 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 blah." But that's the sport, right? That's the athlete. You wouldn't say that if you watching basketball or football and you're like, "Oh, we don't care how many assists they have. We don't care how many shots they took." Like, come on, man. Of course you're gonna care, right? Even for an art form, right? What makes the good art is the technique. Is like for me, one of the things that was very frustrating as in early art was like when they showed the block of red paint or blue paint or whatever, right? And it was like, this is art. I'm just like, what the fuck is that? Like, how is that art? It's just a block of red paint. Like, how's that art, right? But then you started to understand, like, oh, they made this huge canvas. They painted this whole red block with no like brush strokes. How the hell do you do that, right? And anybody that's ever painted anything, you can like, if you paint a wall, right? Like you can see like it's very difficult to paint in such a way that you can't actually tell how you painted it, right? You would, unless you do like a whole bunch of different strokes and all this other stuff. Like this, you have to do more technique, right? The technique is important whether it's the sport or the art. So likewise, I think we need to be real about that for our art. If we want to take our art seriously, we need to understand that yes, technique is important, right? The way that people break down lines, and I think this is why, or rather, this is how you can bring in people like Lupe, right? For a lot of people, nobody cares about. I don't say no, but for a lot of people, they don't care about Lupe, right? Because he often seems as too technical, right, in many ways. Even though he has a lot of bangers, again, Read My Soul brought this up, so I didn't mean to bring all this stuff from the video. Go watch the video, but it's just he has great points in there in that a lot of people kind of don't give Lupe that respect, and I think it's precisely because he's known as a technical writer or artist, and people don't value that, right? Why we don't value that is because there's no clear definition of what makes good hip hop, right? So I think if you have this clearly defined thing of saying, oh, this is what makes it go, it's the impact, it's the longevity, it's the technical ability, then we can have that conversation more productively. Then we can actually include all these people who are doing amazing work, but are not getting due recognition. And lastly, I want to say the fourth thing is music composition. I think that's a huge part as well. Is the production. They don't have to produce it themselves, obviously, but if they're, how you pick your producers, right? How are they working with the producers to create a unique sound, right? That's still super important. Sampling, I don't know if that counts as production, but I do think that's a very important aspect of it, like the sampling and mixing, because a huge element of hip hop, what makes hip hop so unique from every other art form, is the fact that we borrow from like a lot of our African, deep African audio to blues, audio, whatever. Past in the way that we bring our history forward into the future, right? That's what sampling is, right? Shout out to Sinners, man. It's beautiful. Is that we bring the history into the future through samples. Samples are so core to hip hop that I don't think you can adequately say what makes good hip hop without mentioning samples. So yeah, production, sampling, and I say melody or some elements of that, like the song composition, music composition. But yeah, like how well are they using the instruments? How well are they is their voice going to the song and all this other stuff, right? So yeah, I think those four elements should be the metrics in which we define or grade or whatever the GOAT status, the GOAT title, whatever you want to say. This way we actually have fun, creative, productive conversations, and we incentivize the right types of things, behaviors in terms of our artists, right? So when artists are saying I'm the GOAT, they can't just say that just to say that. It's not just a bravado thing. Like sure, bravado whatever is part of the thing. Personally, for me, I kind of disagree. I think it's not just bravado. It's like you have to have these other things, right? Because if it's just bravado, like literally anyone down the street could be like, yeah, I'm the GOAT, yeah, I'm making hip hop because I'm confident, I'm arrogant, yeah, but obviously not, right? Like we care about these other things. So let's be real, let's be productive, and actually be clear about what we're looking for in terms of hip hop as a sport and as an art form. And that's where I ended. Thanks for listening. Let me know what you think in the comments if you agree or disagree. I don't know if I want to tag Read My Soul. I don't know if he'll watch the video. Probably not. But yeah, I just want to do more of stuff like this, and not just hip hop, like all sorts of things. I want to come back and make these videos. But yeah, hip hop is super important to me, so I just wanted to share some thoughts on that. But anyways, we'll end it there. Thanks and have a great day. See ya. Hey, I just wanted to make a quick addendum to the video I was editing. I was like, oh, I missed this part. I think this part is pretty important. In the future, I'm probably just going to read the comment full out and then break it down. But something I mentioned in the comment, excuse me, is about subjectivity versus objectivity, right? I think there is a argument that people often say of like, oh, art is subjective, therefore it's just who I like, right? And or some people might say, oh, you can't make it objective because you'll extract the value, or it's about it there's a concern that it like kind of devalues the art, right? Because if you try to measure too much, right? If you try to take too much of the metrics or focus too much on the metrics, it can take away from the art form. And I actually do agree in some regard in that. But I think there is something to be said for the fact that there is no such thing as pure objectivity or pure subjectivity, right? What I mean by that is in any conversation you have, you can't rely purely on subjectivity, right? You can't rely purely on what you think, because you're having a conversation with somebody else, right? So you have to communicate with them. In order to do so, you have to reach a level of agreement, right? A mutual understanding of what we're talking about. And that's where the idea of objectivity even comes from, is that we're trying to figure out, oh, what's real outside of me and you, right? Now that I'm not going to get into the whole philosophy of all that. All that's to say is that when you're talking about hip hop, right? It can't just devolve into, oh, this is my favorite because I like it, right? Similar to what I said before, I think you do need some level of objectivity that allows you to actually have a meaningful conversation, right? You set those metrics. You can say, like I said, I'm not going to rehash everything, but yeah, you set those metrics. And if you disagree with those metrics, then at least you can actually talk about why you disagree or what metrics you would rather have or whatever, right? But that fosters a better conversation than just, oh, I like it or I don't like it. And on the other side of that, I'm not too concerned about being too objective with these metrics, because the whole point of having metrics that are discussable, right, is that they're discussable, is that you can change the metrics, right? There's only the objectivity is understood to be only a tool for conversation, right? It's not the end goal. It's not the goal. That's why I said these things like cultural impact, longevity, all these other things, right? Because it's not so set in stone as just like sales, right? That's why I mentioned these specific metrics, because they're measurable, but they're not so clear cut that there's no conversation there, right? Because if you just say sales, then that's what it is. It's just how many they sold, right? There's no real conversation you can have around that. So that's why I think you need to have a melding of the subjective with the objective in terms of actually making a meaningful conversation. So yeah, just wanted to make sure I put that in there, because I can already know some people are blah, 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 blah. But yeah, so thanks.